Well, I'm glad to say I'm joined now by Madeline Grant, who is a columnist. She's assistant comment editor and parliamentary sketch writer for The Telegraph. Madeline, on the train strike, both sides seem to be absolutely digging in, don't they? They're getting really very determined about this strike. What do you think it's going to take to break the deadlock?
You know, I don't know, because as you say, there's a real, it's like both sides have kind of have sort of dug themselves into these trenches. I mean, on the one hand, as you mentioned, you have this is all happening amid the backdrop of a Conservative leadership race, in which both candidates are now trying to sort of out right-wing the other and to really prove their muscle as proper Conservatives, especially Rishi Sunak's case, because he's been criticised so far for being far too much of a status quo candidate. So now he's looking for opportunities to show that he's a sort of true blue Tory. And then on the other side, you have even Labour's Keir Starmer is very much using these rail strikes as an opportunity to show just how much he has moved away from the Labour Party of the past and the old trade union influence. And this week he sacked a shadow frontbench Minister Sam Tarry, who had gone behind picket lines. So,
but it wasn't just for being on the picket lines, was it? It was because he was actually talking about government policy, which he hadn't been given permission to do.
Oh, that's a good point, actually. Yes, he'd kind of gone freelancing and was saying, here's what we will do, making up policy on the hoof. But there was also a ban on shadow ministers from doing that. So to let him go ahead and do that would have made him look very weak indeed. So pretty much all of both major parties are now trying to prove their weight in this sense. So I don't really see a massive relaxation of the position coming from there. And the other thing is, of course, that since the lockdown, everyone has changed. Not everyone, of course, not all industries operate like this, but many industries have changed their working habits. So more people can work from home. So the unions don't quite have the same leveraging that they would have had, in the 70s, when it wasn't just passengers, it was also they were supplying energy and they had the ability to turn off the lights across the country. Yeah,
I mean, you mentioned what's happening in the race. I have to ask you about that. Rishi Sunak was seen as the golden boy of the Tory party, and he is really lagging behind. Liz Truss got over 60% of support from Conservative voters, according to the latest polls. Rishi Sunak with less than around 30. Where's he gone wrong?
Well, I think that his big problem is that he's been far too safe. He thought that he could basically sell himself as, I'm a status quo person, I will be responsible. You need a responsible person to weather you through these tough times. But I think he had massively underestimated the extent to which Conservative Party members were actually looking at the state of affairs after Boris Johnson and saying, we've been in charge for 12 years. We don't really have all that much that's Conservative to show for it. And even if we are taking a bit of a gamble with Liz Truss, I think that many felt that we might get some more Conservative policies enacted, and that would be a risk worth taking. And Liz Truss has been making, I think, all of the right noises in the hustings, whereas for not just the hustings, but throughout the campaign. And I think that Rishi Sunak has been a bit too safe, and he's now being drowned out by her campaign. He's struggling to cut through. I think his problem is that he's not taken enough risks.
Yeah, well, she is taking a pretty big risk, isn't she, by saying she is saying about the unions at the moment. And you've got there, as we said earlier, Mick Lynch threatening that he's going to call out a general strike if she becomes the Prime Minister. I mean, he's been saying that some of the things that she's been doing, he says it's the biggest attack on unions and people's individuals, and that he's taking away people's right to strike. He's very angry and says that he is going to call a general strike, which would be disastrous, wouldn't it, if Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister? I mean, how do you balance those two sides of this particular issue?
Well, it's a kind of short-term, long-term thing, because I would imagine in the short term for Liz Truss to be seen as the scourge of the unions would actually be quite beneficial to her. A lot of Tory members would say, well, great, she wants to take them on.
Shades of Margaret Thatcher.
Exactly. But in the long term, that might create massive logistical problems for when she actually becomes Prime Minister. So I think you have to kind of get the balance right between sounding bullish now and perhaps being so bullish that any kind of compromise becomes totally impossible later.